A nationally acclaimed poet, the winner of very important prizes, in fact, some big money prizes, has now written his first novel, and it's about the life of a woman whose hopes for fame in show business for herself and later for one of her children end in disappointment. Well, we'll learn about those disappointments and how they all come together for a story in which many of us will see ourselves. And we'll do all that when we talk to Alan Sharpiro about his book, Broadway Baby. All that on North Carolina Bookwatch. Next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guest is Alan Sharpiro. He's the author of Broadway Baby. Welcome, Alan Sharpiro.
Great to be here, D.G.
Well, you were born in Boston and went to college there, but since 1995, I think you've been a North Carolinian.
Well, I've been teaching at UNC since 1995. I actually moved here in 1986.
Wow.
My now ex-wife got a job teaching in the communications studies program at UNC, and I was teaching at Northwestern, and I commuted for 3 years until we had our first child. And then I decided, with a baby coming, I couldn't commute anymore, so I got a job at UNC Greensboro and taught there until 95, and then and got a job offer from Washington University. They were going to give my ex-wife a job, and UNC was so desperate to keep her, Stella Pollack, professor in performance studies, that they negotiated with the English department.
So you rode on her back to
I was a spousal hire, yeah, I was a spousal hire.
Well, that's great. So you're longer term, golly, that puts you in North Carolina almost as long as any other place that you've lived.
Longer. I've been here longer than anywhere else.
The other thing that you sort of bridge, when we talk about your book, we're going to be talking about a lot about where you grew up, where this novel is set. But the extraordinary thing to me is that you're really a nationally known prize-winning, and big money prize-winning poet. And what leads a poet, established poet, to take a risk in writing? I should also say that your nonfiction memoirs have been very well received. But here, this is a leap out into the dark, isn't it?
Well, it is in a way. I joke about, I got to a point in my career where I wanted to have readers because not very many people read poetry. But there's that. But there's a strong narrative impulse in all of my work, poetry as well as prose. This book actually started as a memoir, as a series of autobiographical essays. And I started it in 2002, and I just couldn't get it off the ground. They just felt bound by fact. They felt the writing of the essays wasn't teaching me anything about the experiences I was writing about. It just wasn't working. And after several years of trying to make that work, I decided I was going to just start making things up. And once I was once I gave myself the permission to let my imagination go to work on this material, rather than when you're writing nonfiction, you're bound by fact. Nonfiction is still very much telling a story, but you're telling a story under oath. Whereas in fiction, I'm not bound by that at all. And so once I was able to give myself the freedom to just sort of let my imagination run, then it took off, and I had really a lot of fun. It didn't feel like a risk at all. It just felt like fun.
Well, did it change altogether from your attempts to write more in the memoir? Is it 50% of facts and 50% imagination? How do you?
I guess the way I would. There's a lot of factual details in this that correspond to my personal experience. sort of like the outer shell of it is, like, I grew up in a family with, you know, a brother and a sister. My father was in the meat business. He was a foreman in an abattoir. My mother was a secretary. My brother was an actor. He died of cancer.
Wow.
You know, my sister was a political firebrand in the 60s. So all of that stuff is true. But really, the poem, the story is written from the perspective of this mother, and even though it's in limited third person, it's still very much in
It's her voice mostly.
It's her voice. It's
her voice mostly. Well, let's talk. Let's tell us about Miriam, who is the central character, but not the only
not
character.
the only character.
And tell us first about her.
Well, you know, there's again a correspondence with my mother, but
Let
my
me
mother's
interrupt
actually.
You. Let me interrupt you. Just I apologize.
Yeah,
this
no,
is
that's
just
okay.
terrible. But we get to know Miriam from the time that she's a little girl
10 years
until
old.
she's at death's door.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I say, tell us about Miriam. I didn't tell you at what stage of life, but
yeah.
you pick a stage of life to tell her
Well,
about.
I was going to say that I know certain facts about my mother's life. You know, my mother's a much nicer person than Miriam is, and Miriam's character was evolved out of the necessities of the story I was telling. There were things that she ends up doing and feeling, and you know, my brother was an actor. My mother didn't really push him into show business. My mother was interested in the stage, but wasn't as obsessed with the stage as this character is.
Well, tell it. Just focus on Miriam and tell
Miriam,
us. Forget about your mama for a minute.
Yeah.
And tell us about
Miriam
her.
is someone who, you know, is the child of divorced parents in the 1920s when nobody got divorced, and used the musical comedy as both an escape from the circumstances of her life and as a way of navigating the complexities of her life.
Where does she live?
She lives in right outside of Boston in Dorchester, area of Dorchester called Mattapan. She has a very high-powered mother who's a businesswoman, where there were very few of those at the time in the 1920s. So she was essentially raised by her grandparents. And so there were always these things in her circumstances that distinguished her from other people. So she never felt normal, never felt like, and was always self-conscious about who she was and where she came from. Her father was a butcher, and her cousins, her aunts and uncles, despised him or had contempt for him because he was just kind of a greenhorn, kind of a peasant type, and they had airs of being, you know, something more than that. And so she was self-conscious about that, and you know, so she was someone who was in love, as so many Americans were and are, with glamour. You know, with some kind of transcendence of the ordinariness of her daily life, and falls in love with a man who is extremely good-looking, but is completely ordinary. And you know, the inference she draws from his good looks is that they're going to live a kind of Hollywood-like life, but of course that doesn't happen. And so she's someone who's always. When I was growing up, my parents used to say, "You've got your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You know, you want to eat. You know," and in a way, that's sort of true of her. You know, she has these aspirations and desires that are much larger than the terms of life will allow. So she's a kind of angry optimist. You know, she's somebody who.
She is a tough nut, though. I mean, in her ways.
She's incredibly, I think, admirable in the sense that she's a survivor.
I thought. I mean, this is set in Boston.
Yeah.
It's set in a Jewish family.
Yeah.
But for me, the people could have been North Carolinians in a small town in a conservative Protestant church, with the young woman, high school cheerleader, aspiring to beauty contest and Broadway, and ultimately to be famous, marrying the best-looking guy. And then, for me, I'm going back to my high school reunions now, many, many years later, and there they are, kind of having led a tough, ordinary life.
That's right. That's
so
right.
I mean, it's a universal story that you captured.
You know, as William Carlos Williams, a wonderful American poet, says that contact with the local is the only road to the universal. You know, and the more particular a story is, the more it's rooted in the particulars of somebody's life, both their personal life, their cultural life, their political life. the more accessible, in fact, it is to anybody from anywhere, I think. So I agree.
Miriam, as an older teenager, at the point where she finishes high school and has to choose what she's going to do next, she comes into a working relationship with her mother, who is a very savvy dress shop owner.
That's right.
But what happened? This helped me with this. What happened is that Miriam became a better customer person than her mother. I mean, her mother was good. She became better, attending, complimenting,
because it was theater. Because it was so much of it was theater. It was setting up the mannequins and dressing them up in the window and changing the window displays according to the holidays, and also she got to perform her mother. When she's in the store, it was like she was playing a role, and that's what she's always wanted to do, was to act. And so one way of getting, her mother was admirable in a lot of ways, but as a kind of nurturing presence, not so much. And one of the ways that Miriam both sort of evens the score is to play her mother better than her mother could play her. And then later her mother gets sick, and she has to take care of her mother, and she does a much better job of taking care of her mother than her mother did of taking care of her when she was younger. So a lot of this has to do with, there's a theatrical element to all of that.
So and now this is new, I missed this. I should have gotten this when I read it. She's an actress in every role, all the way through, and that she feels like she's got to perform well as an actress rather than as a
but
person.
There are places when her actual life, when she's not acting, and that those moments, they tend to be kind of disaster, catastrophic moments, and until the end when she because most of her acting, it's carrying out a preconceived idea of how she should be in relationship to other people, and often the very role she's playing that she's using to connect with others is estranging her from others. And it's only toward the end when she sort of, after a series of losses, and she forms that friendship with a woman in the retirement community where she lives who's got Alzheimer's, finally makes a kind of genuine, intimate connection with somebody. But of course the person doesn't know who she is, and can't acknowledge who she is.
The reason we're skipping back and forth is that this carries Miriam from the time that she's a pre-teenager all the way up till she's
her 80s.
Into preparing for death herself. One of the interesting occasions was when she was very young, first becoming in love with the Broadway theater, with the theater, and she identifies with a Broadway character out of Showboat, I think, Julie.
Julie, Miss Julie.
And tell us about that identification and how that thread runs through the story.
Well, it's also important at the moment when she first is introduced to Julie. She's gone to New York. Ostensibly, her mother is taking her to New York as a kind of outing for the two of them, but it's really for the mother to meet this lover that she has in New York. And he has a child as well, and so they drop the kids off at the theater to see Showboat. And so Miss Julie is a mulatto woman who dies, who's self-sacrificing, dies a terribly tragic death, but of course is someone whom everybody loves, and
she's a hero. She's mixed race, black.
Mixed race,
she's
black, right?
And Miriam identifies with her.
Identifies with her suffering, but also what Julie gives her is a kind of glorified form of her own pain, and just because she's someone who is, who's different from others, who suffers unjustly, doesn't deserve the fate that she
takes on as a little child. She takes
on the identity because it's an escape from the circumstances of her actual life, which is being this child of divorced parents and not being taken very seriously.
And part of rebellion against her mother's domination as well.
It's rebellion, and it's also an attempt to be the center of the universe, But unfortunately, it's only in her own imagination.
Well, I don't want you to give away the story too much, but it comes back. Well, she maintains this interest in Julie and then names a child.
Names her child after her.
And then what happens? What happens?
Well, there's a series of ironies involved with that. The child is never as affectionate or intimate with Miriam as she would like. There's right from the beginning, a mother-daughter. There's always some kind of. She can never quite see the daughter for who she is in and of herself, independent of her need for the daughter to be a certain way. The daughter ends up being a kind of a radical during the 60s, falls in love with a black man, and is disowned by the parents. The father has no tolerance for this whatsoever. Miriam isn't as intolerant, but can't go against her husband.
But Miriam, who had adopted the persona of a mixed race person, can't quite make. I mean, she's also a product of her time. It was a tremendous scandal and a shame to have a child end up marrying out of the religion, much less out of the race. This just didn't happen then. So, even though she has enough imagination to recognize that that there should be a connection between her and her daughter, the thought of being in the presence of her daughter with her friends, with her family, is just something she can't conceive of. So she ends up sending money to her daughter. After the daughter's disowned, she very diligently sends her money and checks and all that. The checks which the daughter never cashes, never. So she tries to maintain a connection, but it just never happens. The daughter's passion is politics. Miriam's passion is theater. And so they fundamentally just don't. And in fact, there's one of the things that marks the daughter is Miriam's treatment of the maid that she has when they're growing up, Melba, who she treats reasonably well, but still refers to the 60-year-old woman as her girl. We have a little taste of The Help in Boston.
And The Help, right, exactly.
In Boston during the same, close to the same time
Same
period.
period, yeah.
Well, the daughter's interesting, essential to the plot of The Two Boys. Even more essential, I think.
Absolutely.
And I want to talk about. We probably don't have time to talk about both of them,
Yeah.
but Ethan is again. This could be in North Carolina, where the mama, having been disappointed in not being able to be the star herself, picks out a child who has enormous talent, and it turns out that this child, Ethan, does have talent.
He has a lot of talent.
But what happens?
Well, he is, show business is a very tough business to be successful in, and whether you're successful or not is not a reflection of your talent. It's a combination of talent and luck, and he just never had the luck to make it big. He worked, he became a professional actor. His last big credit was he was in Sunset Boulevard, though he had a minor role. And he was sort of somebody who was always on the edge of becoming famous but never did, which was a profound disappointment to Miriam, but not because he was disappointing her, but because she was disappointed for him that he was talented enough, he should have been better known. But whenever she expresses that, it always comes out the wrong way. It always sounds like, that he let her down. And so her relationship with him too is kind of really complicated.
Really tough. The universal part of it that rang so clear for me was that the mother, the main character, with aspirations for her son, probably not as realistic as they might have been. It could have turned out differently, but then he marries, and the wife has other aspirations for him to be a breadwinner. And the mama just keeps
pushing
until
because she knew, and in fact, it turns out that she was right, that giving up the stage for a job as a commercial real estate broker was not going to satisfy him for very long, and in fact, it didn't, and he ends up leaving his wife and running off with someone from the set of a musical that he's in. And so in a way, Miriam is, she feels bad for the daughter-in-law, but said, but there's a kind of, I could have told you this was going to happen. In her way.
Well, this of course, a lot of people will read your book and say, well, that's what happened to me. My husband's mother or my mother or from the mother's standpoint, saying that wife got in the way of my child.
Right.
moving back in time, the one point where Miriam seemed to be clicking was when she developed a relationship with Ethan's teacher and coach.
Stuart
And a
Foster.
very complicated story
Yeah.
with many. We have we dealt with sort of the changing attitudes about race and the old time ones that are reflected in the book. Another was her inability to deal with homosexuality.
Absolutely.
But she really did like this teacher, didn't she?
Loved him. Yeah, no question about it. Was absolutely in love with him. And so long as the sexual or the flirtatiousness between the two of them was role playing and was play, she could enthusiastically engage in it. But when she stumbles upon his actual, real sexual life, it appalls her. Because there was no place for it in her world, you know. There was no way of understanding homosexuality for her back then.
Again, a more universal theme of the disappointed woman who is in love and charmed by a guy who turns out to be gay.
Yeah.
In my generation, that just was a crushing thing. Today, it's just part of since we're talking about a North Carolina book, I could only find one North Carolina character in this, and he was a part of this
this young
crushing.
actor.
Now, why did you pick a North Carolina guy to? Why did you locate the North Carolina? No, why did you locate the sort of the jerk and make him come from North Carolina? What were you after about that?
Just lack of imagination, I guess. I'm living here, but he is not from Chapel Hill. He's from Asheville, after all. So
he plays in it. I mean,
he does play a kind of
tell us
role.
about him. And he's a minor character,
he's
but
a very minor
important
character.
one.
But very talented, and he ends up having.
He is a contemporary.
A contemporary of Ethan's, a little
Ethan.
bit older than Ethan, but yeah, he's like an older brother to Ethan, and is very charming. And Ethan wants to please this kid, and Miriam never trusts him. So there's something not quite on the up and up with him, and then she finds out that in fact that he is he's not that young. I think he's 19 or 20, but that he is the person that Stuart, the man that she is working for and really loves in as much as she's loved anybody, is having an affair with this kid, and it
Blows
just sort of blows the world up entirely for her.
Well, we've only touched on just a few of the themes of this book, and so, but I haven't given you the chance to. I mean, I've told you about the themes that I found, and I probably missed what you were really trying to do for your reader in this book. What's the message of this book?
The message of this book is in a way, it's a struggle of one person's struggle to connect with other people in a genuinely intimate way, and it's something that she and that thinks that it's going to happen through art, through musical comedies, through because that's where love happens. You know, that's where the idealized connections occurs on the stage, and everything that happens off the stage is a disappointment. And it's only at the very end of her life, when she forms this relationship with this woman in the retirement community, that she finally genuinely connects with another person. This is when she becomes a person. This is when she becomes a person.
It's a journey.
It's a journey toward personhood and authenticity, and someone who uses art. And I think musical comedy is a popular art, but it's still art. Uses art as a way of understanding her life and as a way of seeking refuge from her life at the same time, and has to be divested of all that before she can finally really be present to another person.
Well, you're a poet.
Yes.
Now you're a novelist, and I think this is going to be critically very well received as a novel. So
From your lips to God's ear.
So what do you do now?
Well, I've actually got a second novel. The youngest character in this book, the Sam, the one who becomes a writer, there's a kind of sequel to this that I'm working on now. He ends up getting interested in the Alamo because he discovers, and this is true, that there was a deserter at the Alamo, and his name was Moses Rose, and that the Daughters of the Republic of Texas have tried to suppress this story because it tarnishes the myth of this Anglo-American heroism. And his name was Moses Rose. He was a Jewish deserter.
Oh, wow.
And so he ends up writing a book about this guy, and then he ends up being haunted by the ghost of this Moses Rose. Originally, I was going to title it "The Yellow Rose of Texas," but it's called My Own Private Alamo, and so I'm just working
You're
on
far
that.
along on it.
I'm very far. Yeah, I am.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait because Sam, we didn't get into this. Sam,
Yeah.
a poet,
Yeah.
obviously has some connections with you,
Yeah.
and I want to get to know him better.
Yeah, great.
And I want to get to know your work better. This great first novel
Well,
is
thank you.
something which has been a pleasure to read.
Thank
a
you,
pleasure to
PG.
hear about it from you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks. And thanks to all y'all for listening. Our guest has been Alan Sharpiro, author of Broadway Baby. Thank you for being with us, and I hope you'll join me again next week when I introduce you to another wonderful North Carolina writer. See you then.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.